Well, welcome everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of the Journey to Thrive podcast. I'm your host today, Deacon Jim Friend, and I'm the Director of Mission Advancement for the St. John Vianney Center. Our podcast is produced by the St. John Vianney Center, and if you like this content, I hope you're going to stick around and subscribe. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you download your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, all that good stuff. Remember also that you can follow St. John Vianney Center on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and wherever you download, again, your favorite episodes of your podcast, you can find us. I will also leave links to the show notes of this episode and to our guest today, Father Patrick Hyde. And also you can find more information about St. John Vianney Center and our podcast at sjvcenter.org. Well, today I am joined by Father Patrick Hyde. Father, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be with you, Deacon. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here today. I'm going to provide a little bit of a bio for the benefit of our listeners. Father Patrick grew up in St. Louis. Before he entered the Dominicans, he taught middle school at St. Michael Indian School in the Navajo Nation. He was professed first vows by the Dominican province of St. Albert the Great in 2010 and was ordained a priest on May 14th, 2016. Father Patrick has served as St. Paul's as a priest since 2016 and then as pastor since 2019. He holds an MA in theology and a Master of Divinity from the Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis. He's currently pursuing a Master's of Nonprofit Administration at the University of Notre Dame. And in addition to his role at St. Paul's, he served the National Eucharistic Revival as a National Eucharistic Preacher. He currently serves on the Provincial Council of the Dominican Province of St. Albert the Great, on the board of the Aquinas Institute of Theology, and as the Dean of Bloomington Deanery in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. Again, Father, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you here today.
It is good to be with you, Deacon. Thanks for having me again. Yeah.
Father, we first caught sight of you with some of your LinkedIn or Facebook and Twitter posts, and because I know you've done some work around the extraordinary expectations that are placed on priests, especially in our modern culture, with the shrinking number of vocations and the decreased resources. As we know here at St. John Vianney Centers, that piles on a lot more pressure on our priests, on our men and women religious. Could you tell a little bit about some of the expectations that can manifest in your own words in the day-to-day life of a priest?
Yeah, thank you, Deacon. I start by saying that a lot of my observations are a fruit of two things. First, my work as part of the National Eucharistic Revival, going around the country and talking with clergy, primarily priests, but also deacons also, about our Eucharistic lives, and then also hearing from them the challenges and the struggles they face in the ordinary exercise of their lives and priestly ministry. And then also my work with the Amazing Parish, which is a ministry helping pastors to be great pastors and to lead amazing parishes. And expectations are real for everyone, regardless of what their job is, right? There are real expectations, right? You know, when you are hired, you're given a job description normally, and it has the things upon which you are being expected to perform as part of that job. There's also the perceived expectations, the expectations that we implicitly put upon ourselves based on attitudes, emotions, past and current experiences. And so one of the things I've noticed within myself, I would say also, and perhaps primarily, is that these unrealistic, these perceived expectations oftentimes overshadow the real expectations. So for instance, as a priest, we're expected to do pastoral ministry, to love the people that we're called to serve. But those perceived expectations, those unrealistic expectations, come and kind of overshadow that. So instead of being the man who I am and loving the people that I can in the best way that I can, I think that as a priest, I'm supposed to be as solicitous to the poor as Saint Damien of Molokai, as as generous with my time in the confessional as Saint John Vianney, and as loving of those who are on the margins as Mother Teresa. And then I look at my life as a preacher, because as Catholic priests, we do a lot of preaching. I think, well, I have to have the poetic eloquence of Gerard Manley Hopkins, and the fervor and the style of and the impact of a St. Vincent Ferrer who went around Europe converting thousands. I need to be as jovial and as accessible as the favorite uncle telling stories around the dinner table. And so there's the pastoral, there's the preaching, and then there's also just the administrative. As a pastor, we're in charge of the parish, and we think, well, because of that, I need to be a CEO like Steve Jobs. I need to be on top of the finances like a CPA, and I need to make sure that everything we do is to the highest professional standard. And oh, and by the way, if on top of all of this I have a school, it can't just be any ordinary school. It has to be such a Catholic school, such an amazing furnace of evangelization and holiness that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton would blush if she saw it. And so all of a sudden in our lives as priests, especially as pastors, these real expectations that we have to care for the temporal goods of the church, to be a shepherd to our people, to preach the word in truth, beauty, and goodness, and simply to be the leader of the different ministries that are there, become mixed up in this, in a way, toxic cocktail with all these unrealistic and perceived expectations.
And Father, just kind of to a part two of that question, where do you think that a lot of this comes from internally, that you perceive this, or do you think also it's expectations that are placed on our priests by other people, like the parishioners and
Sure.
administration, that kind of thing?
That's why, Deacon, I'm saying it's kind of a cocktail, because it's
Yeah,
all of those things.
sure, sure.
We want
Yeah,
to be priests, and we want to help people because we love Jesus, and we've
right.
known the love of Jesus
Yeah,
and the transformation of Jesus in our own lives.
yeah,
And so we want to share that with people, and we want to be able to help lead people. And so there are expectations that we have, and we look to the lives of the saints and to the holy priests and religious and people in our lives who've exemplified the great virtues that we're striving after. So there's that too. I think there's also, we have to be honest, we live in the information age. And so if I'm struggling in a particular area of my leadership or of my life as a priest, and I look online and I see, wow, this priest has 1 million followers or whatever. I don't know if any priest has 1 million followers, but
right.
like I see that priest is always giving those talks, and all of a sudden I start to see myself as less than or other. But I
Sure.
also think on top of this, and this is where the real challenge comes in internally within religious communities and diocesan presbyterates, is that there is a fear of intimacy and vulnerability with brother priests, and acknowledging our struggles and our shortcomings with brother priests because of the cloud of the abuse crisis in the church. That if we admit that I'm really struggling in this particular area, or I need help here, we may be ripped out of ministry, or we may be, thrown to a parish, or kind of marooned in a ministry that we don't really want. And I think there's, I guess, a lack of trust also that can really permeate a lot of our relationships as priests, because of our fears manifesting themselves in unhealthy ways.
Sure. And how do you personally manage these, and how do you coach others to do the same?
One of the great blessings of my life, probably the greatest blessing of my daily life, is as a Dominican friar, I live in community.
Mm.
Now, in community, that doesn't mean that we're going to have healthy community, and I'm blessed to live in a healthy community. But the thing that is required is just radical vulnerability and honesty. And God has put in my life brothers in my current community, but also within the province, to whom I can turn when I'm having struggles or difficulties or challenges. That's been a huge piece of it. I know in my own life, when I became a pastor in 2019, and so what, 7 months, 8 months into my time as pastor, only 3 years out of the seminary, 3 years as a priest, I was thrown into the being a pastor that I really want to be a pastor. And then there was a global pandemic, and then on top of that, I'm a human being. I have a life, I have friendships, I have a past, I have all those things. And
Sure.
there was a lot of challenges in the midst of all that. And God, by God's grace, our ministry is thriving and growing, but there were a lot of things I wasn't necessarily addressing in my own life. Really two things. First and foremost, the help of a brother priest who just sat down and said, "Hey, how you doing?" And
Yeah.
wouldn't get out of my office until I actually told him what was on my heart, what was going on. But then I also had to share that. right? So there was that kind of that double side of it. So having the people in our lives to whom we can talk in an unfiltered way without fear of retribution or fear of those is so important and so critical in my own life. And that's one of the things that I encourage other priests is, who is that brother priest to whom you can turn? And a challenge that a lot of priests, especially diocesan priests or religious who are living on their own, is that many priests spend so much of their time in total isolation from other people because they live alone. And it's easy when we're struggling or when we're, in some way, shape, or form afraid to just kind of like a turtle go back into our shell. And so I think I always encourage, if when you acknowledge, something that we kind of talk about with me and one of the other priests on my staff here, see a problem, fix a problem, right? Don't be afraid to say, hey, this isn't working. How can I address this? Or, hey, I'm feeling this, to talk with your staff. I mean, one of the biggest breakthroughs in my own life was acknowledging to the staff that I'm really struggling right now to figure out what it means to be a pastor, and while being your priest and also striving to love you as a father. Like, I've never been in that position, and just being willing to show a little bit of our own insecurity and vulnerability invites other people into our lives in really profound ways. Because even though it may not feel like this, my experience in the church has been that people really deeply love their priests and want to help them
They
and
do.
want to be of service to them in the way that we're of service to the people of God.
They absolutely do. I've seen that myself countless times. And you've given some wonderful examples of how you were coached a little bit. Have you seen what do you seen the impact on the mental and spiritual health of maybe some of your brother priests? I would imagine, well, we know that many of them are struggling as well. What are you observing among some of your peers?
Well, there was a study that came out a year or so ago about the happiness or the health of priests. And it was, most priests said that they're very fulfilled in their life. But there were two things that stuck out. Like, most priests feel completely overwhelmed, and most priests don't feel like they can trust either their bishop or brother priests in leadership.
It was very sad. I saw
Which
that.
is such a sad commentary, because that really doesn't, imagine if most people said, I'm very happy in my marriage, but I don't trust my spouse. It's like, well, wait,
Tragic.
but
Yeah.
that's a lot of what we're saying. That
Mhm.
kind of shocked me in the midst of all of that, is that I think because the reality is, as priests, we do what the angels can't even do, right? By the graces of holy orders, we are able to absolve sins. We are able to make ordinary bread and wine, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Those are just incredible gifts. So, as a priest, simply living our life as priests in a public way, we do incredible and wonderful work. That's meaningful
Yeah.
work. That's beautiful work. That is, I mean, I was just talking with one of our alums from my Newman Center, and he's a new priest, and we get invited into the most intimate, vulnerable pieces of people's lives through no merit of our own,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
we can fall in love with that and resent the stuff around it. We can be happy to do the work of of the sacramental work, but then it's easy for us to think, oh, or to become in some way a sacramental machine, right?
Mhm.
Instead of seeing our celebration of Holy Mass as the most important thing that we do every day, if we're doing two or three masses every single day, it's just one other thing that we have to do before we get to the real work. And so there's a lot of challenges too in trying to build community in the midst of all that, because that's the struggle just inherently with fewer priests. But then we also have to, we're not seeing and being around other
Yeah.
priests. We
Yeah.
don't go out of our way to build fraternity, to work with each other, not just to say, hey, let's go grab something to eat or spend some time together and talk, but like, what are we doing with the priests in the area around us to minister to each other and to help each other? Like, one of the great blessings that I've experienced is when we were during the pandemic, we were going through a few people resigned from their positions. And so it was, kind of a crazy, chaotic situation. And I was talking with one of the other priests, of the other parish here in town. And he's like, well, hey, let's work together on that. I mean, how often does that happen? I don't hear that kind of, hey, we're in this together, let's work together to get there. And I think just simple things like that of, maybe my parish has resources that the parish next door doesn't, how can we help each other out? How can we not just be brothers to each other, but co-workers in the vineyard in a real tangible way between our ministries?
That's beautiful. Father, one of the things that we've seen, just a national trend, is that a lot of men are becoming pastors much earlier in their vocation and in their life. Um, I would imagine that has a big impact too on just their mental and spiritual. They're they're almost barely used to being priests over a couple of year period, and then suddenly they have this responsibility of pastor in front of them. Have you witnessed that a little bit as well, as far as just the stresses that they're under?
Yeah, certainly, and it's not
Yeah.
just that. In most cases, that you're pastor.
Yeah.
In many cases, I've seen you're pastor of 2 or 3 or 4 parishes
Right.
that are
Yeah.
miles apart, that
Hmm.
have different cultures, that have different values, that have different liturgical tastes and styles. So it's not just that you're being put in a position of leadership at a young age. I mean, the reality is most of us aren't ordained priests until our late 20s at the earliest. Most of our peers by that time have children and careers. So
Hmm.
it's not as if we can't do that kind of work. It's just that not only are we being asked into leadership as we're developing our priestly identity, we're often put into seemingly impossible situations. And in the midst of all of that, we can feel helpless, right? Because if you're in a situation, and I've certainly known many brother priests who are in those kinds of situations where they get sent by their bishop and they have 4 parishes
Yeah.
and they can barely handle the mass load on the weekends.
Hmm.
And if they can even handle it at all. And it's easy in that moment to just feel like, well, I've been abandoned, I've been forsaken, I can't do anything in the midst of all of that, and just to allow the things that have been to be. But I think the challenge of, and I certainly, I was I remain one of the youngest members of my province ever in terms of years of ordination
Mm.
to be made a pastor. And it's hard because you're still developing your identity as a priest,
Sure.
and now all of a sudden you're the boss. And the reality of the church is that the pastor in his parish has pretty much total authority.
Hmm.
And so it's not just that you have authority, you have, I'm not going to say unlimited, but you have a lot of authority
Sure.
with very minimal oversight.
Hmm.
I was at a conference a few years ago and a bishop was there, was asked, what's the biggest challenge to the Catholic priesthood? And he said something to the effect of, one of the biggest challenges we face in the priesthood is that there are few jobs, if any, that have less professional accountability
Mm.
as the priest, especially the pastor. And so you add all of that to all of these expectations and feelings of inadequacy. And I know in my own journey as a priest and as a pastor, especially as a pastor, it's like there's this feeling like, imposter syndrome. Like if
Right.
they only knew how much I struggled, or if they only knew how unworthy I am. Or I work in a college in Newman Center, and there's a lot of times in my life where I think to myself, and I encounter our young people, and especially people who are in difficult places, and I see myself in that. I was like, man, I made a lot worse decisions than this person did when I was that. And so we can
Sure.
get so caught up in all of that
Yeah.
that it makes it hard for us to move forward. That's what I see as a lot of priests getting into that new environment, getting into that place, and then just not knowing what to do, not knowing how to move forward. And perhaps maybe the worst of all is feeling as if you don't matter and aren't making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And that feeling of isolation has got to be maybe even one of the more driving factors. I know, even in my recent ordination as a deacon, in our formation process, we had a group that decided that we were going to get together on a nightly basis and do evening prayer. And we did it because we weren't in the habit of doing evening prayer, but we found that time of jumping onto a quick conference call to do evening prayer offered us the opportunity to even talk about some of the challenges that we were having in formation, some of our fears, some of the things that we were concerned about, even some questions that we might have. And although that's at a much smaller and different level than what you're describing as a priest, I think that lack of community, not just accountability, but just that lack of fraternity and support, especially for a young man or younger man who is now a pastor, is critical. It's critical to provide that kind of support and community building for them.
Yeah, we need that support.
Yeah,
So I'm
part of the
the
human condition.
yeah, I'm the pastor of the Newman Center, Indiana University, and by God's grace and our wonderful head coach, we are having an unbelievable football season this year. And
Nice.
so I've been going to almost all the games, and one of the things we were walking, and between the church and the football stadium is the big parking lot with all the tailgates. And especially as a religious wearing a habit, you're quite conspicuous. And the first time going through all of that was kind of daunting. And then as we were walking the other day, there were three of us. We were thinking to ourselves of how much wisdom there was in Jesus sending out his disciples two by two, and our Holy Father Saint Dominic sending out his disciples two by two. That when we have someone walking in the battle with us, we may be uncomfortable, but we're not alone.
Mhm.
And I always use this, and especially in talking with people in confession who are dealing with a sin that is persistent but also shameful in some way. Is if you notice, they often I've been told this. It's a story. I don't know if it's true or not, but it is a story. That why do they yoke oxen side by side? They can do more side by side than they can do front to back.
100%. Wow, interesting.
And
Yeah.
I think in the same way, it's like when we have someone with whom we're maybe not every day, but someone who is carrying our burdens with us, and we vice versa, we can do more together, walking shoulder to shoulder, moving in the same direction than we ever could on our own.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you've also talked a little bit about the oversaturation of ministries in some parishes and how this can lead to another sense of helplessness and burnout and just a lot for a priest to manage. How have you addressed this, or have you addressed this, or have you coached others to do that?
Yeah, so I would just say, in my position as a pastor of a Newman Center, I'm in one way a privileged position
Hmm.
because the mission of our parish is manifest and clear. Our campus, we are on the campus of a major state university. So it's like, who are we supposed to serve?
Yeah.
The people of this parish. We're in the middle of a college campus. So it was not easy, but it was easier than I imagine in most places to kind of say, hey, wait a second, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? And is that connected to our primary reason for existing, which is evangelizing and discipling and building up the kingdom on campus?
Hmm.
And so we went from a ton of ministries to very few. But now, in addition to that, the few ministries that we were doing were very focused on forming people to be co-workers in the vineyard. So if we're going to do a Bible study ministry, it's a Bible study ministry that leads to apostolic formation, that leads to more leaders in the community who understand what we're trying to do. And so, even though it starts with something very small, we started with 6 or 8 students in one Bible study. Now we have hundreds, and we have way more things going on than we used to, but there's a connectivity to it. And so
Hmm.
that's what we did in my particular parish. But in most places we go into as priests, we encounter this, well, this is the way we do it here, or this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
Or, Father, why are you trying to change something that works?
Yeah.
And the reality is that a lot of ministries continue for a long time because they're meaningful to the people that are leading them. But I think the oversaturation part comes especially from the priest perspective when we give equal energy to all of the different things, or we give too much energy to the wrong things. And I know I've been victim of that. I know that there was, when I was especially starting off as a pastor and getting some coaching from Amazing Parish, one of my coach was at the time was saying, why do you keep coming back to this particular issue? Well, it's bothering me. Okay, it's bothering you, but is that issue the primary issue and the most important issue? Well, no, it wasn't. It was just the thing that was bothering me. So I made it. I
Hmm.
gave it way more attention and weight
Sure.
than it really merited. And so sometimes the oversaturation comes from picking the wrong battles or focusing on the things that are only going to lead to agitation and not necessarily good or healthy or meaningful conflict. It's just going to be conflict for the sake of conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, You've encouraged priests to put Jesus first and zealously strive for holiness. And do you find that even priests need that reminder from time to time?
I need that reminder every day. Um,
Me too.
and the Lord in His generosity is really good to me on that front. He
Yeah.
doesn't stop reminding me on that front.
Hmm.
I you mentioned in the introduction, I got a lot going on. In
Yeah,
addition
you
to
do.
running a parish, I'm on our provincial council. I'm on the board of our school. I'm pursuing a business degree, which was totally unexpected in my life, and I have to spend time away from the parish in the summers in order to accomplish that degree.
Hmm.
And when I came back from the summer, it's like, okay, I get back. I've got like a couple days, get my feet on the ground, and now, boom, students are back. Let's roll. And it's easy for me because I'm a very task oriented. Like, just give me a list of things to do, and I'm just going to bang that out and get it done. And
Hmm.
then on to the next task, on to the next task. It's easy for me to get so caught up in just taking every little thing in isolation. And so we have every year, or in our parish, we have planning days and we have retreat days. And this year, our planning day, we talked about, okay, just coming back to the vision of what we're trying to do with our students. And it was just a reminder that day of, okay, like, yes, I've got all these things going on, and yes, I have particular gifts, but the only thing that matters is if I'm holy and if I'm striving after holiness.
Hmm.
All that other stuff is just stuff. And I'm gonna hurt myself first of all, and perhaps others, if I'm not approaching those things through the lens of a disciple of Jesus, a beloved son of the Father. And if that's not the most important priority, if that isn't the one consuming desire of my life, no matter how hard I work, no matter what good I do, so to speak, as a leader, however we can gauge leadership, I'm not going to be the priest that God called me to be. And
Yeah.
I see this in myself, first of all, but I also see this in other priests, how easy it is to drift away from a life of prayer, a life of deep and abiding intimacy with the Lord, a life where there's spiritual reading and a continuing uh, deepening of our understanding and our love for the mysteries of God. One of the priests I live with, he walks with our we have because it's college, we have a lot of young people who become Catholic every year, and he talks a lot with them as, hey, sometimes we have to remember these faiths, or these elements of our faith, are also mysterious. And though we can understand certain elements of the mystery, the depths of the mystery are inexhaustible. And so easy is it for us in general in life, but especially as priests, to limit the inexhaustible mysteries of God.
Mm. Beautiful. So, Father, I'm just curious, what caused you to go for that Master of Nonprofit Administration?
Well, first and foremost, religious obedience.
Okay.
So, as Dominicans, we are expected to go back to do some sort of what we call complementary studies.
Hmm.
So, after we finish our studies for the priesthood, there's an expectation that a few years after we're ordained or make solemn vows as brothers, that we would go back for something. It doesn't have to be an academic
Yeah.
pursuit, but it's just something to help you with your ministry. It could be like a certificate course or something like that.
Hmm.
And essentially, what the conversation was with my superiors was, um, what we need in the province is someone who has good formation in the practical and the more administrative side of things, to help our brothers who are moving into the administrative and the pastoral side of things to get a better grasp of that.
Mm.
And so, for whatever reason, they asked me to be that guy to
Yeah.
pursue this degree, so that um, I have by nature administrative gifts, but I was kind of at the point of my professional life where I knew enough to be dangerous.
Hmm.
And so this provides an opportunity for me to deepen my own understanding of administration and operations and management, but also to help our brothers who are currently in formation after they're ordained
Hmm.
to apply those things to, because not everyone's going to have that luxury.
Yeah.
And in the Dominicans, administration is not a huge commodity within our order. We
Yeah.
tend to be more academic and more theoretical than
Hmm.
necessarily practical. And I always like to say, I ended up in administration because in the land of the blind, the man with one eye is king. So
Well, I'm sure it'll be a tremendous resource for your brother priests
yeah.
and for your community. Kind of finishing up here, my wife and I attended the National Eucharistic Congress
Mm.
over the summer, and I was curious what was your experience of it, and do you see it continuing on in some forms? I know you were a National Eucharistic speaker, or perhaps still are. I was curious what was your impression of that great
Yeah,
gathering?
Deacon, thank you for asking that. So when it was announced, the Eucharistic Revival, and then the Eucharistic Congress, and I serve in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. When it was announced that it would be here in Indianapolis, uh, there was just something about the whole process that I thought this is going to be one of the most important things our church does in my lifetime. And I still have no idea how it happened. I was invited to be a part of the Eucharistic preaching team. I jumped at that opportunity because of my belief that the Lord is gonna do something amazing through this. And then to be kind of like from the very beginning involved in the revival and the Congress in such a beautiful way, but also in a unique way. And then as part of the Congress as well, I was invited to be a part of a working group that helped to kind of plot out the days, the content. And so like to be so involved in like my behind the scenes ways, but then like people would ask me all the time, what do you hope from the Congress? And I was like, he's like, I don't know. Like my hope is that people walk away with what the Lord desires for them. And so to see it all come together and to be a part of that was beautiful. But the really beautiful thing was like that for those 2 years, it was like I just know something great's going to happen. I just don't know exactly what that is.
Hmm.
And the fruit for me out of the Congress was that everyone had a different fruit. Everyone had a different experience. Everyone had something. I was blessed to go to the Congress with my parents and to be able to walk with them and to see them receive that formation, to see them be a part of that group in a way that they had never been before. Uh, it was just such a powerful coming together of our country at a time. We obviously just went through an election. There's division,
Yeah.
there's animosity in our world, and yet there is someone who has overcome the world, and he's as present to us now as he ever was in the Eucharist. And if one more person is more deeply convicted by and committed to that, then the National Eucharistic Congress was a success. But I'll give you an example of like what does it look like and how do I hope it moves forward. I was just before our midday mass today, I was talking with someone from the other parish in town, and he was talking about the things that he's been working on since the Congress in his parish with a small group of men. And it's like, man, if 60 other thousand people are doing something just a little bit more,
Just one thing,
just
right?
one
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
man, imagine where we're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of this whole revival and Congress, is that we're just being invited and reminded and brought back into that path of discipleship, which is simply be faithful and intentional in the next step, and God will provide.
Yeah, and I think it's a good place for us to close today. What a I had a tremendous experience with my wife, and for me, it was just the weeks leading up to ordination when the
Mm,
Congress took place. So it was a wonderful little retreat to take with her as we both embarked on this new life and ministry as a deacon and a wife of a deacon, and that's a ministry all in itself, being the wife of a deacon. And it was just to be in a stadium with 55,000 folks, and you could have heard a pin drop
yeah.
when they processed in with the monstrance, with our Lord, people on their knees, people in tears. it was just a very moving experience. Every liturgy, every talk. It really encouraged my wife and I also to spend more time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, which we have done here at home in my new assignment. Actually, we've made that a weekly thing, and it really it brought us closer as a couple, but it also brought us closer to our Lord. So, thank you for sharing your reflection on that.
Yeah.
And again, Father, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate all of your insights, and thank you for the work that you do in ministering to your brothers on your experiences of being a pastor and what it means to balance all of that. And I learned something from you today, and just some great perspective on all of that. And if you'd like to get in touch with Father Patrick, I will leave his contact information in the show notes of this episode, as well as his handle on X and other platforms. So to our audience, thank you for joining us for another episode of Journey to Thrive. And once again, you can find more information about our mission and ministry and about Father Patrick in the show notes of this episode. Thanks again for joining us, and to all, God bless. Thank you, Father, for joining us. Thank you.